Hello, Bible readers. It is Thursday, September 10th. We are reading from Numbers chapters 3 and 4 and Matthew, the last part of chapter 26. I'm going to spend just a little time on Numbers and most of my time on Matthew, but in Numbers we see, there's too much work for just Aaron and his sons to do. There's a lot of priestly tasks that have been given by God to Aaron. And so God appoints the whole Levite tribe to help. This part of the tribe to do these things, this part of the tribe to do those things, depending on sometimes their age, sometimes their family. It gets very specific as to how to count who goes where and who does what. One of the lessons we might find from this is that God finds work. Those for whom God finds work, God finds help for them as well. And so as much as Aaron is given all these tasks, he is not expected to do it all himself. There's an interesting piece about the whole firstborn thing, that the Levites are appointed to be the priestly tribe rather than a firstborn from each family. And there is this firstborn theme that goes throughout Scripture, and yet there's also the non-firstborn theme too. All the different people through whom God's promise happens and is kept who aren't the firstborn. Jacob, Isaac, there are a bunch of David eventually we'll read about. He's not the firstborn, and yet God's promise goes through others, even though the firstborn is lifted up as so vitally important in books like Numbers. Yeah, that's all I had to say about Numbers. And so as we get into Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew's passion, we're into it now. This is where both Mark and Matthew present this trial as a Jewish trial, you could say. What's interesting is how Matthew, Mark, these are the synoptics, you might know. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are synoptic Gospels. John is John. John is its own thing. And so, Matthew and Mark, for example, are locating this trial at the house of the high priest. They place it on the first day of Passover, just a few hours after the beginning of the feast at sundown, at a time when Jewish officials would normally have been eating the Passover meal with their family and friends. The Passover meal is a pretty big deal in the annual calendar of a Jew. And so, it'd be kind of like having this trial, this big moment on Christmas Eve for Christians, or on Easter Sunday. And so this commentary that I'm reading about Matthew speaks to the differences between Matthew's account and Mark's too, with John's account, and the historical problems of how they each present what's going on. So one is that Matthew talks about the house of the high priest was a very unlikely setting for a meeting of the whole Sanhedrin. And then he brings up how there's lots of confusion over even what that is. What is the whole Sanhedrin? Is it a religious body, a political body? Does it function as a Supreme Court? Is it an investigatory committee, or like a task force, like an ad hoc committee? We're not exactly sure what the whole Sanhedrin would have meant, which is okay. We don't have to know everything about everything. But when we compare this description to John, for example, the actual sequence of events is different. And this is where, how historical do the Gospels get? How accurate are the facts of the case? We have to make some choices sometimes. According to John, Jesus is arrested and executed before Passover began. There, the major legal formality is the trial before Pilate and the event at the chief priest's house. That's an investigatory hearing prior to Jesus being sent off to Pilate for trial. So it's just a different sequence of events on different days. And so this commentary says, on the historical level, John's scenario, a preliminary investigation held at the chief priest's house on the evening before the day on which Passover began, that's more likely than the synoptics, he says. The synoptic version is most likely a combination of two tendencies in early Christianity. This is important, I think. A tendency to bring out the Passover aspect of the Last Supper by making it a Passover meal, and the tendency to shift blame for Jesus' death from the Roman governor Pilate to the Jewish religious and political leaders. The early church, and our church too, likes to blame the Jews far more than maybe they deserve, especially when Pilate was the one in charge of the whole area as the governor. The rest of this is about really highlighting the difference between Jesus's fidelity and Peter's giving into temptation and being afraid. That's a familiar theme. His sinfulness is, of course, eventually forgiven. But it's good that we're into this part of Matthew to help us really see and know what it is that God is up to in the midst of this passion narrative. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.